Good evening. Welcome to Tell Us Something. Oh. Now it's started. Thanks for coming out tonight to support live storytelling in Missoula. Just a few housekeeping rules before we get going. No flash photography. So if you are taking photographs, that's great. And if you're posting to social media, also great. Hashtag Missoula Stories. Tell Us Something is proud to be fiscally sponsored by Missoula Community Foundation. And this event will be videotaped by Missoula Community Access Television as part of its Media Assistance Grant Program to nonprofit organizations. For more information about the grant program, please contact MCAT at 542-6228. I want to give a quick shout out to all of our sponsors, the Montana Book Festival, Top Hat Lounge, the Wilma, CabinetParts.com, Missoula Broadcasting Company, Gecko Design, Martin McCain Woodworks and Design, and the bookstore at the University of Montana, Fact and Fiction and Find. You came to listen. Let the listening begin. You are Tell Us Something, and Tell Us Something is you. Without your ears and your stories, there is no Tell Us Something. We are sharing a unique experience here tonight that cannot be duplicated on the radio or a podcast. Thank you for your support of each other and of stories. Every Tell Us Something event has a theme. Tonight's theme, Fork in the Road. Thanks again to the Montana Book Festival and the Wilma for hosting us tonight. John Engen was born in Missoula and never left. He has a degree in journalism from the University of Montana and spent his late teens, 20s, and 30s in the newspaper business. He was elected to the Missoula City Council in 2011 and became Missoula's 50th mayor in 2006. He has been re-elected twice, now Missoula's longest-serving mayor. He'll run again for the post in 2017, and he hopes that he hasn't worn out his welcome. Please welcome John Engen.
Thank you very much. I'm not actually sure I was supposed to come through the curtains, but it just felt right for whatever reason. So apparently there's a 3-minute rule in effect this evening. Is that what you all have heard? So, yeah. Any public comment? I'd like to hear from you before I start talking, if that's okay. Forks in the road. Interesting. So most of my familiarity with forks in the road began when I actually physically found a fork in the road and picked it up and then began enjoying a lot of carbs and bacon. And from there, developed a slight weight problem. And we can talk about that at another Tell Us Something, I hope, when we can do perhaps a 3-hour segment with PowerPoint and photos. But tonight, we will talk about the many forks in the road that are all about mayoring, right? And so here is the dirty little secret about being a mayor. You run for the job. You think you know what it's about, you get the job, you recognize you had no idea what it was about. And so there are lots of things that happen at the City of Missoula every day because we have remarkable professionals and dedicated public servants who show up with great intentions and talent and skills and the burning desire, and it really is. It's palpable when you're around these people. They actually want to take care of people, with some minor exceptions. But most folks show up every day and they want to fix stuff for people, right? They want to take care of business, which makes part of what being a mayor in Missoula, Montana about is relatively easy. However, it's the stuff you don't expect. Naked bike rides. Who knew? The most email, ladies and gentlemen, I have ever received as mayor of the city of Missoula was about naked bike riders. And I finally reached a point where I said, you know what? I'm going to get a tandem. So before the surgery, Jim Nugent is going to ride on the front. I won't even have to pedal. But we moved on from that. It's the stuff you don't expect. And so what I didn't expect in 2010, so this is the 4th year I'm serving as mayor, pardon me, and I have 4 gentlemen show up in my office and they say, we're going to go ahead and buy a water company. And I said, wow, well, that's a thing. I wonder what I do with that. And then I started to hear from people in my place about what they thought of that and what the opportunities were. And so we began complicated conversations which were all about, in the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, all about diplomacy, all about building relationships, all about talking to a super rich guy from somewhere else about the fact that he really didn't want this water system, but he wanted the ones in California, and could we make a deal, and can we get something done? And I think, yeah, we ought to get something done because water turns out really important. And so we marched down a path. And that path leads me to a place where I realize that I'm a dupe, right? Not the first thing you want to admit, but I'm Norwegian, so I get it. It's not the first time it's happened. I have lost a lot of card games. Never owned all the utilities in Monopoly. And that shit was cheap. So we reach a point where there's a line, and it's drawn in the sand, and I'm not used to lines drawn in the sand, and I'm not used to not finding a winner, and I'm not used to figuring out ways where everyone can be happy, because that is what I try to do every day when I wake up. How can I make more people happy, or in some cases less unhappy? Depending on the day. Naked bike ride. Wow, that naked bike ride is really sort of in there. And I didn't see it. Did any of you ride? Yeah? I don't believe you. So, with very little time left, I will tell you that when you're lied to by the world's largest investment fund, when the people who put their faith in you to take care of the most fundamental business that is before them, when you have a choice, and the choice is, do I risk a lot for everything, or do I walk away? The choice becomes, you risk a lot for everything. But here's the thing, here's the lesson I learned. When the people are right, you're right. When the system works, it works. When things matter, we show up, we make a difference, and we change our part of the world in a way that matters for a very long time. Ain't nobody gonna remember my name 100 years from now, and that's okay. But 100 years from now, people will know that a water system that was once in the hands of investors from a very long way away who did not give a rip about Missoula, Montana, no longer control a precious resource that makes life happen in a place that we love. And that ain't bad. That, ladies and gentlemen, that's a fork in the road, and the only way people like me get there is when people like you help me. So thank you for helping me pick up the right fork, take the right turn instead of the easy wrong, and change our world.
Thanks, John. Jameson Gordon holds a BFA in theater at the University of Montana. She is a former actress, writer, dancer, and artist. She is working on changing the status of these creative pursuits from former to current. To pay the rent, Jameson works as a retail visual merchandiser. In her spare time, Jameson struggles to keep up with her 5-year-old daughter, who is already more talented and witty than Jameson will ever be. Please welcome Jameson Gordon.
That's one way to do it. Is that good?
Yes, that's good. Following the mayor. Awesome. I'm gonna do it. All right, so this story is called Fork in the Sky. Picture it, Hamilton, Montana, 1993. I'm 16 years old. It's my first solo flight as a student pilot. I'm up in the air, and I realize I can't do this. Backstory. Like a lot of people, I like watching big airplanes land. And the summer after my freshman year in high school, my dad and I were up in Missoula, and we drove by the airport, and we watched a jet come in. And my dad, kind of offhandedly, he just turned to me and he said, "How'd you like to learn how to fly one of those?" I thought he was kidding, so I was like, "Sure." He wasn't really kidding, because the next week he took me down to Hamilton Aviation and signed me up for pilot lessons. I became the youngest student pilot in the Bitterroot Valley and the only female. No pressure, no pressure. So the first plane that I flew was a red Piper Cub. This plane had been built in the 40s. It was literally held together with duct tape, but it was a great plane. And I, flew for about a year, taking lessons after school and on the weekends. And it was a lot of fun at first. And then one day, all of a sudden, it just wasn't. It was my dad's dream to be a pilot, but my dad was an older man. He was a World War II Navy veteran. He was stationed in the Pacific Theater. He was on aircraft carriers, but he wasn't a pilot. He was a chief petty officer. He never got to fly. And by the time he signed me up to do it, his health was so bad that he wouldn't have passed the physical exam that's required for all student pilots. So he was pretty much living vicariously through me. And I was a good daughter. I tried to please him, but as time went on, I realized my heart wasn't in it. And when your heart is not in something, when you are 10,000 feet up in the air, that's when you can get killed. Y'all are laughing, but fact. something like 90% of all small plane crashes are due to pilot error. And I was aware of that. I was terrified. I didn't love it. I wanted to stop, but I was afraid to disappoint my dad, so I just kept going. So, like I said, flew for about a year. I logged a lot of hours. I passed my written exam. I got my night flying done. Pretty much all that was left for me to do was fly solo. Start flying by myself, do a couple of long-distance flights, and then fly up to Helena to meet with the FAA agent to become licensed as a pilot. So we're at the day of my first solo flight. But this time I was flying a red Cessna 172. Do you guys know why a lot of small planes are red or have like red in them? What? Okay. Red is not a color that's commonly found in nature. So in the event that the plane crashes in mountains and forests and water, it's easier to spot the wreckage. Yeah, like that's a little morbid tidbit for all of you. You're welcome. So it's the morning of my first solo flight, and my instructor, George, and we've been practicing what's called touch and goes, which is where you come in for a landing, you bring the plane down, you hit that runway, and then you push on the throttle and you just take off again. You circle around, enter your flight pattern, back to the runway, land. The minute you touch down, you take off again. Touch and goes. It's just practice. And I don't know how many of those we had done, but at one point, when I landed, George said, "Hey, taxi off to the side here." And I knew it was coming. So I taxied off to the side of the runway, and without any real ceremony or preamble, George just said, "You go." And he got out of the co-pilot seat, and he shut the door to the plane, and he left me alone in there. And my heart was in my throat. I didn't know what to do except just start taxiing down to the end of that runway. I lined up the tail of my plane with the windsock, because you want to line that up with the direction the windsock is blowing. You take off and land into the wind. And I got on the radio to announce myself to the surrounding air traffic. And at times when I was nervous, and this was one of those times, I would lisp on the radio. So I clicked on, and I said, "Hamilton traffic. This is Cessna 18269 Sierra, taking off runway 34, over." Smooth. It was time for me to take off, and so I just stared down that runway. I got myself centered, and I started slowly pushing it on the throttle, going faster and faster, accelerating while pulling back on the nose until I finally lifted up off the ground, and I was in the air, and I was flying that plane by myself. And in that moment, I said, "I can't do this." I don't even remember how to land. This was not my idea. This was my dad's dream. It was not my dream. It's not what I wanted. I wanted to be a normal teenager. I wanted to focus on the speech team and run track and snog my boyfriend. I didn't want to be in a goddamn plane every weekend. And I had no idea how I was going to land. I was terrified, seriously. I entered my flight pattern to come around to the end, to where the runway was. And, okay, I'll tell you what. So people who say that they've done like Microsoft Flight Simulator and all that crap, and they're like, "I can land a plane," bullshit. Landing is a feeling in your gut, and if there are any pilots in here, you know what I'm talking about. It is a feeling. And I was looking for that feeling because I knew that was the only way I was not going to crash that plane. So I could see the runway ahead of me. It was coming up slowly. I was pulling back on the throttle. I extended my flaps, which is a hinged part of the wing that comes down and creates drag to help slow the plane down. And I am just watching, because if you do a landing right, if you do it correctly, you will not know when you touch the ground. You'll feel yourself sinking slower and lower and lower. And you'll see the nose tilting up, and you'll see that horizon, and you'll just be waiting and thinking, when am I going to touch down? When am I going to touch down? Any minute now. And if you do it right, it just kisses it, and you stick it. And I stuck that landing. And I pulled back on the throttle, and I was pumping those brakes because I wanted to get off that runway as quick as I possibly freaking could. And I go over to the side, and my dad was there, and my instructor was there, and everyone was just, yay, woohoo, and I'm just ready to throw up. And there's this tradition, and I don't know why, but once a pilot solos for the first time, they take and they cut off your shirt tail. Don't know why. I knew that this was coming, so I was wearing a little crappy shirt. And they cut my shirt tail off, and they wrote my name and the date on it, and they tucked it up on the wall in the airplane hangar, and for all I know, it remains there to this day. But I knew I didn't want to get back up there in the air. But I did. I flew for about another year. I quit when I was 17 years old. I did not become a licensed pilot, and my dad pretty much disowned me. But I felt like I just had to be true to myself. And in the end, he forgave me. And I know more about flying than most of you, so that's my party trick. Now that I'm older and wiser and more mature and all that, I think about hiring an instructor, because I would still need one. I never got my license. Hiring an instructor and renting a plane and getting up there and seeing how much I remember and seeing if I'm still afraid or if maybe it's become my dream now too. And, seeing if maybe I can still stick that landing. Do it. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jameson. Neil McMahon grew up in Chicago and moved to Montana in 1971. He is the author of dozens of thrillers. His favorite is Lone Creek, set near Helena. He's married to Kim Anderson, who has been deeply involved with the Montana Book Festival since the beginning. Please welcome Neil McMahon.
Okay? Can you all hear me? Okay. Thanks. Man, there's a lot of you out there. Oh, well, first off, it's an honor to be here. And I'd like to say thanks to Mark for inviting me, and thanks to all the people who put in the great deal of hidden work to the event. A lot of generosity involved in terms of time and resources and effort and so on and so forth. And thanks to you all for coming. I mean, you're the ones who've made this a success, over the years. Am I echoing there, or is it just me? Everything okay? Okay. Well, as the date for this came nearer, and it started to dawn on me that I actually had to have something more or less intelligent to say up here, started thinking about it. What came into my mind and lodged there was an old joke. And don't panic, it's very short. The way it goes is that a teenage girl comes home from school one afternoon, and everything seems normal, same as ever. And she walks into the house and sees her mother sitting on the couch, weeping, just face in hands, racked with sobs. The girl, of course, hurries over. Mom, what's wrong? Mother, pats her hand and says, oh, honey, it's okay. It's just that I realized something. If I'd gone ahead and murdered your no good son of a bitch father the first time I wanted to, I'd be walking out of prison today. Tough act to follow. I'm not going to try. Okay. And I went on to review my life such as it has been, looking for something to say, and the next thing that struck me with a great force was how many really stupid things I've done. I mean, again and again, it was, my God, what was I thinking, sort of a deal. It's not pretty to look back like that. So anyway, on to my little story here. I started working as a carpenter back in the early 70s. I actually started as a union apprentice in Helena in 1973. And in a few years later, I started getting interested in writing. And, along the way, I started thinking, really, I'd kind of rather make my living as a writer than a carpenter. And this is easier said than done. So I kept swinging the hammer and trying to buy time to write and so on, and, lots of ups and downs. There was a brief little peak in the late 80s when I managed to publish 3 horror novels. I was trying to kind of ride on the coattails of Stephen King and The Exorcist and all that stuff, and they vaporized. And that little bubble tanked very quickly, and I was back out on the bricks again, and so on and so forth. So we fast forward to 1998, on or about, and by this time, I have managed to cobble together a draft of another novel, this time a mainstream thriller. I'm trying to reinvent myself as a writer. Get it to an agent in New York, and then, astonishingly, we get word that there is an editor at HarperCollins who is actually interested in this. This is kind of a big deal. On the other hand, it's kind of not, because I've been through so many of these deals already where it was, a near miss and somebody's interested and it peters out and so on. Couldn't take it too seriously, but you can't not take it seriously. So the deal was, anyway, the way it came down, this was a Thursday in July that we got this news. And this guy was going to call the next day on a Friday, and I had to actually be there to talk to him on the phone to formally confirm if he made an offer. It was a yes or no deal. If he did not call, if he didn't call, nothing was going to happen. If he did, I had to be there to talk to him, confirm it, a kind of a handshake over the phone, make contact and all. And above all, not give him the weekend to change his mind. So the wrinkle with this being that this time the crew I'm on, we're working way up Butler Creek Road, past the airport and then up in the mountains to the north. It's about 3 miles past where the pavement ends, this rutted dirt road and so on. And at that time, believe it or not, young folks, nobody had cell phones. And there was no way for me to get this information. I couldn't afford to take the day off work and just hang around. So it came down that the only way we could do this was that my wife, who was working at home at the time, would field the call. And if it was a no, then that was it, she'd stay home. But if it was a yes, then she was gonna have to drive up there and find me. And I didn't even know, to tell her where the place was. It was just a few miles up past where the pavement ends. And there's this kind of chalet-like house up there. And the only thing I could say was, honey, you'll see our trucks, because the crew I was working on, our trucks looked basically like a mobile junkyard. And we actually had a client call the sheriff's on us one time, the first day we showed up on a job. This is true. And on top of everything else, he's driving this little Buick, this little bitty 80s white Buick that has a wheel clearance of about, this much, and the ruts in the road are about this, and the top of it was peeling off, looked like it had leprosy, but okay, that's another story. So I'm up there with the crew, and the day goes on, and nothing happens, and nothing happens, and nothing happens. And it gets to be about 2:30 in the afternoon, which is 4:30 New York time. And by this time, I've written it off. I figured, this guy's forgotten all about this, forgotten all about me. He's in a bar someplace, drinking $20 martinis in Midtown Manhattan. And I was inured to this, but on the other hand, this is kind of a big deal. Again, I was trying to reinvent myself, and writers know that when a novel goes out like that, if it doesn't sell in the first few passes to an editor, chances are it's not going to. There are exceptions to that, but usually they're looking for pretty much the same thing. So this was kind of the handwriting on the wall kiss of death deal, So anyway, I remember I was on the side of the house, it's mid-afternoon. It's that point where day's dragging and things are getting heavier, and I was on the side of the house, hanging a door, and I heard my friend Kim Zupan, who was working with me. I heard him yell at me, and I looked over. He's pointing. That's still hard for me to get through. He's pointing down the road, and I see this little white car sitting up there. My wife behind the wheel, kind of looking around, trying to. I would like to say that that was the start of a meteoric career and a wave that I've been riding the crest of ever since. In fact, it was more like a little ripple in a child's wading pond that a toddler in a rubber duck inner tube could very safely negotiate. It meant a lot more trough than crest and so on and so forth. But still, that was the start of everything. You know, that was that moment when everything changed. And it has made all the difference. Anybody, you know, it's cliched, but to say, anybody who's chased the dream and for years and watched it slip away, and then you get that moment where you get a piece of it. You know what that means and how it changes your life and the way you see yourself and the world and all that sort of thing. And when I think about it, that's what I think of, is looking down and seeing that little white car. Kim behind the wheel, you know. So have I got another minute or two more? Oh, I'll assume I do. I'll add one more connection there. I mentioned my great old friend Kim Zupan, who was the guy who yelled at me there. And, very much in the same situation as me. He was also a carpenter and aspiring writer. And it took him way too long to get his own break, but eventually he did with the publication of a novel called The Plowman. Some of you all might be familiar with it. It's extraordinary. Oh yeah, okay. The editor at HarperCollins who bought my book that day, a guy named Dan Conaway, then went on to become a literary agent. And he was the agent who took on Kim Zupan's book, The Plowman, and handled that and sold it and so on. So kind of a little triangle there that was kind of cool. Yeah, if I may just, I'll finish this off with one more very brief story. Hey, I'm Irish. This one's really pretty good. It's actually, it's Zoop's story, Kim Zupan's story. Talk about a fork in the road. His grandparents immigrated here from Slovenia in the early 1900s. And the deal was that the old man came across, a typical deal. The husband came across first, and he got a job as a miner in Nevada. And he sent back for his wife and a couple of her brothers to come and join him. So they took off and made it across Europe to Cherbourg in France. And were there just about to cross the Atlantic. At the last second, they get a telegram from him saying, hold off. He was going to go up and work in the mines in Butte, which, believe it or not, apparently was a step up. And so he needed time to get up there and get settled and so on. And so they were forced to cancel their transatlantic passage and sell their tickets that they had bought on a ship named the Titanic. True story. Thank you all again.
Thanks, Neil. Perry Nyes moved to Missoula in 1992 as a refugee from New York City. Oh, before I get finished introducing Perry, you can get Neil's book at the merch table if you wanted to grab that. Perry Nyes moved to Missoula in 1992 as a refugee from New York City. You can also get her book at the merch table. She's the author of A Grand Obsession, A Piano Odyssey, which was named an Editor's Choice by the New York Times and Best Book of the Year by the Washington Post. She has written for National Geographic, The Atlantic Monthly, the New York Times Magazine, Sports Illustrated, Outside, and many other national publications. She's a presenter for the Speakers Bureau of Humanities Montana and does living history talks about the Rocky Mountain Rendezvous era at museums and schools around the state. She lives in Helena with her husband, Wendell, her horse, Deva, and their cow dog, Winnie. Please welcome Perry Nyes.
Hi. How's that? The first time that I left New York to come to Montana.
Do you want that?
Yeah, I'm just going to have this here in case I need it.
Okay.
I got
If
it.
you need to spin that.
Okay.
Just drops and then spin
I
it.
did it. Okay, great, thanks. The first time I left New York to come to Montana, it was 1983. I'd been living in New York with my boyfriend. I'd followed him there. And this was because I kind of had lost track of what I had wanted to do myself. I was pretty much on a program that other people had laid out for me, my parents and my friends, my colleagues, my boyfriend. And I'd kind of lost track of what I'd wanted to do. I remembered, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a ballerina. And at one point, I wanted to be an actress. And then a lot through my teen years, I wanted to be a painter. And that had kind of fallen by the wayside when I was leaving for college and said I wanted to be a painter. And that was kind of who I was. And my mother said to me, well, Vincent van Gogh, he could have been a banker if he'd really wanted to. And then my father said to me, well, if you were going to be another Picasso, we would have known by now. So I became a graphic designer, and I was pretty good at it. I had a pretty successful career in New York doing that. And we had an apartment in Manhattan. We were living on 2nd Avenue, which for those of you who don't know is an interstate truck route. And the trucks would shake the entire building when they went by. We were also living over a bar called Cronies that played loud music until 4 o'clock in the morning every night. I had kind of a battle going on with them when they told the super that their ceiling was leaking. I turned the bathtub on and let it run because they never would turn the music down when I asked them to. And I was kind of going a little crazy there, actually. This was the 1980s in New York, and they had shut down all the mental hospitals and the homeless shelters and the rehab centers, and the streets were filled with people who were drunk, screaming at the top of their lungs and sleeping on pieces of cardboard on the sidewalk. It was pretty grim. I would come home and couldn't get into the building because some guy was passed out in a pool of urine in the vestibule and nobody could open the doors. And you'd lay awake at night because the garbage trucks were grinding like right over your head at 3 a.m. This was pretty hard for me, and I started losing my capacity to experience beauty. You have to shut down to be in an environment like that, and it means not only do you shut out the ugliness, but you shut out beautiful things too. And I was losing myself, really. My boyfriend and I had made a deal that we would go to New York so he could go to graduate school, and when he got his master's degree, then it would be my turn to decide where we were going to live. But the year was up, and it was pretty clear that he wanted to stay in New York, and I knew that I was going insane. So I rented a farmhouse for the weekend upstate and went up there alone and took long walks and journaled and tried to remember what my dream had been the last time I had had one. And the last dream I could remember having was that I had wanted to be a fire lookout. And this probably came from in high school. I read On the Road by Jack Kerouac, and at the end, he's a fire lookout in Washington. It just sounded perfect, It was quiet. And then also I remembered, I had kind of been an amateur teenage Thoreau scholar. I wanted to live alone in the woods. Like really different from what I was doing. So I went back to the city, and the first thing I did was I wrote a letter to the U.S. Forest Service. And I said, I would like to be a fire lookout. And a little while later, they wrote me back, and they said, well, you know, we don't have fire lookouts anymore. We use radar. But we have, if you have skills that we can use, we have volunteer positions all over the country. And they sent me like this fat book that was like a catalog of all these volunteer jobs. And they were things like count spotted owls in Twist, Washington, inventory grizzly bears in Ouray, Colorado. And so I was like, okay, looking through this catalog, and what skills do I have that the Forest Service might be interested in? So I trumped up a bunch of stuff and put it on a resume and sent it off to about 30 national forests. And I got quite a lot of interest back, surprisingly. And one day I got a call from the Wisdom Ranger District of the Beaverhead National Forest in Wisdom, Montana. And they asked me, would I like to come to Wisdom and be their wilderness guard in the Anaconda-Pintler Wilderness? And my deal was I had written to all these forests, and I said, you know, what I want is a job where I'm living alone in the woods with my dog. I have to be able to have my dog. I had an English Mastiff named Sam, who went everywhere with me. He went in the elevator with me up to the 8th floor of Gimbel's department store to get the art supplies. He went with me to business meetings at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Where I went, he went. So Sam was going to come with me. And, but my boyfriend was not going to come with me. And he was pretty angry when I revealed this plan, and kind of went between threats and pleading. And finally, I just had to say, I'm sorry, we just don't have the same dream. My parents were really angry. They said that I was running away from real life. This was a phrase they used a lot with me when I was growing up, real life. And I would always think to myself, what does that mean? I mean, what life is not real, you know? And so I would like watch them to see what they meant by real life. And what they meant by real life appeared to be, in my father's case, your dream is to be an orchestra conductor. Therefore, you become a vice president of marketing. In my mother's case, it was, you dream of being a scientist. Therefore, you get married at the age of 19 and have children and be a stay-at-home mother. And they were not happy. I mean, I grew up in the household. They were not happy. And I thought to myself, you know what? Real life, the way they define it, does not come well recommended. And besides, now I was gotten back a hold of the Thoreau track, right? And I was not going to be deterred. So I went out and I bought a Dodge Sportsman van, 1977, and I put curtains in the windows, and I built a bed I put in the back and put in a tape deck with big speakers. And I went to the L.L. Bean catalog and I ordered a sleeping bag and some hiking boots and a compass. And I loaded up my stuff in the van and my dog. And in May, we drove off to the west. And I had never been alone in my life before. And every time I saw some fantastic landscape, the Great Plains, the Rocky Mountain front came into view. I had never seen anything like it. And I would turn to the front seat, the passenger seat, to tell them how amazing it was, and there was nobody there. So I put a yellow legal pad, I rubber banded it to the steering wheel, and every time I had thoughts or impressions, I would write them down. And by the time I reached Wisdom, I had a writing habit. I didn't know it then, but I had a writing habit. And I bought a $20 manual typewriter, and my supervisor took it up to the cabin for me by mule with all my stuff. and dropped me there at 8,000 feet at the foot of the Continental Divide in a 1930s log cabin nobody had ever lived in, no running water, no electricity, 100 miles from the nearest supermarket, and left me there. And I was terrified, but it was silent. The silence was so beautiful. I could hear myself think, and it was there that I became a writer. Thank you.
Thanks, Perry. You can get Perry's book at the merch table, Grand Obsession, A Piano Odyssey. Pat Williams. Pat Williams hails from Butte, America, and began his service as a grade school and junior high school teacher. Pat was a Montana state legislator in 1967 and 1969, and went on to become a U.S. congressman serving the people of Montana in Washington, D.C. from 1979 to 1997. That is the most consecutive terms served by any Montanan elected to the United States House of Representatives. That's 9 terms. Pat lives in Missoula and has taught at the University of Montana for the past 19 years. Please welcome Pat Williams.
Thanks so. Yeah. How are you? You're getting better. With every story, you're getting better. Yeah. My story tonight has to do with a place where I'm from, although Carol and I have been so lucky to live in Missoula the past 20 years. I'm actually from Butte. To Butte in Missoula. And my tale about forks is, as have been the others, true. And it is about a fork in my life, you know, a fork in the road. Well, this is a fork in my life. Gee, if you say that fast, it sounds dirty, doesn't it? Well, thank you very much. In the 40s and 50s, there was an old Irish mayor in Butte from Ireland named Barry O'Leary. That's not funny. And Barry was the mayor who made this story famous. This isn't the story I'm going to tell you, but it will fit all of it within 3 minutes, as have all the others speakers. Barry was the mayor, in fact, who made famous that story about casting a veto every time his city council would pass an appropriation bill to buy a new chandelier for the city council chambers. And he vetoed that bill not once but twice. And finally, the alderman overrode his veto. And he accepted it by saying, all right, I grew up in an Irish household, so I do an accent, all right? He said, all right, we'll buy the chandelier. But I'm telling you, it's a waste of money. I doubt there's an alderman here who knows how to play it. It's okay for the teller to laugh at the joke if it's a Butte joke. That's all right. Barry was a help to me when I first ran for office, which was a legislative seat, Silver County legislative seat in the Montana legislature in the 60s. Barry had been mayor in the 40s and 50s, and I asked my grandmother, an old Irish immigrant, I said, who should I see of your friends that might help me? And she said, well, for the love of God, you got to go see His Honor. You have to see Barry O'Leary. I said, all right. And I knew where he lived. I used to say hello to him on his porch, although I wasn't sure he remembered me. I was a little older then. But I went up to his porch, and I was a bit concerned because I knew that there was this thing about Barry that everybody'd go to him for an endorsement or for help, have him call or visit with his friends about a candidate he liked. And my grandma assured me that Barry would like me because, as she used to say, Batty and I came over together on the boat. But there was a saying that if Barry would always open the door during election campaign season, and he would see the person there who was there to try to get his help. And the rule was that if he kept you on the steps and shook your hands and shut the porch door, you were in trouble. If he had you in to the screened-in and in the winter glassed-in porch, things were a little better. If he asked you to sit on the couch out on the porch and visited with you for more than 10 minutes, things were really good. He almost never asked anybody into the house except, old pals, neighbors there for a visit. So with great trepidation, I went up and knocked on the door, and he looked through the screen, summertime. He didn't remember me, and he opened the door and said, yes? I said, he was no longer mayor, but I said, Your Honor, I said, I'm Pat Williams. Lizzie Hagan Keel is my grandmother. And he put his arm around my shoulder and he led me into the renowned porch, through the door and into the living room, which no one but his closest relatives had ever seen. And he shouted out, Mary, would you put on a couple of cups of tea? Lizzie Keogh's grandson, Pat Williams, is here. I think he's running for office. So we sat for a half hour or more and we talked, and I finally got up the courage to ask him for his help. We just had small talk about the boat and stories my grandmother used to tell about the boat and so on. They called it a boat. I think it was actually a ship. Came from Ireland to New York. I said, Mr. O'Leary, I'm thinking about running for the Montana State Legislature, the House. Do you have any advice? And he yelled, Mary, could you bring the pot in and pour us some more water with these tea bags? And so she filled up our cups again. And he said, be quick now there, Pat, I got to go. And he drank his kind of, and I slugged mine down, burnt my esophagus over. He said, as tribal people do, of course, American Indians are tribal. The Irish are tribal. There are a number of ethnic groups that are tribal, and they seem to excel in storytelling. And so I found out at that moment that if you asked Barry O'Leary a question, he would answer it with a story. And here was the story as he stood and walked me to the living room porch door. He said, Pat, Mary, and I, she had come in and I had met her. She gave me a kiss on the cheek because she knew my grandma. And he said, Pat, Mary and I are delighted you came by. It's just wonderful to meet you. And of course, I know your parents who own the restaurants downtown. And it's a great honor to meet you. And I wish you well in the legislature. You know, you asked me, you told me you were thinking about running for the legislature and asked me if I had any advice. He said, would you be knowing Spud Murphy from Walkerville? I said, yes, yeah, I know Spud. He's an alderman up there. He said, he is indeed. He said, I was standing down in the corner of Park and Main here about 4 years ago, and he said, I'm standing out of that cab company offices, the Owl Cab. And he said, you know, they've got that little, I think he called it a rescission, that little rescission that goes back off the street there. Before you get to the door, you go through that little rescission, that little hallway. And I said, yeah, I know that rescission. And he said, well, I heard, psst, psst. And I turned around, and there back in the little hallway, he said, was Spud Murphy. And he said, Spud said to me, Your Honor, come here. He said, I was mayor at the time, and I went over to him, and I said, what is it, Spud? And he said, he looked this way, and he looked that way, and he said, Your Honor, I'm thinking about running for alderman. And he said, I put my crooked arm around his neck, and he said, I drug him the 10 steps right out to the point of the corner, Park and Main, right downtown in Butte. And he said, I yelled to the top of my lungs, Spud Murphy, I hear you're thinking about running for alderman. And I was just wondering to myself, how the hell do you expect to win if you keep it a secret? Now, I'll bet every 1 out of 10 of you has thought about running for office. Maybe a school board, maybe a student president or secretary of the class. Maybe, and this year proves this is possible, president. What? What? You could do it. Apparently anyone can do it. Whatever you do in life, particularly if the public has to be engaged in it, remember, don't keep it a secret. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Pat. David Allen Cates is the author of 5 novels, most recently Tom Connor's Gift, and a collection of poetry. For 18 years, he's worked as a Spanish interpreter and director of Missoula Medical Aid, a nonprofit that sends groups of medical professionals to provide public health and surgery services in Honduras. Please welcome David Allen Cates.
This is good. Telling a story to the dark. So I'm diving for a loose ball. I'm about 18 inches off a gym court, basketball court, and it's fall practice, Montana Grizzlies, over in the Schreiber gym, and I get the ball, I knock it back into the court, but before I hit the ground, I can see my coach, Judd Heathcote. He's a big man, and he was full of passion, and and I hit the ground, and I slide, and I see this man just full of over-brimming with passion and yelling, and I love that. I love the passion that he had, but as I hit the ground and I slide, I had this thought. I thought, for basketball? And I thought, who cares if the ball goes out of bounds? It's a fatal thought for an athlete. The next day, I quit. I remember walking through campus the next few days, and it's like I had this big hole in my stomach. I mean, the hole we all have that's full of sadness and confusion and uncertainty. And for years, a basketball fit right in there. And I didn't know who I was anymore. I was taking a class, a Native American Studies class, and read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and I had to write a paper on it. I didn't read very many books, and I wrote even fewer papers. But this was exciting for me. I mean, lights were going off in my head. I was thinking about things I'd never thought about before, and most importantly, I was feeling things. The writing made me feel things, and I was very excited. I loved it. I thought, maybe I'll take a journalism class in the spring. So I did. And it was a beginning reporting class, and you had to write a news article one week, and another one, just one on top of the other, and I got a D, and then I got a D, and then I got a D, and then I got an F, and then I got a D. And apparently, you need to know grammar to write. A friend says to me, let's go to Africa. Well, I wasn't a basketball player anymore, and I guess I wasn't a scholar. We had a mutual friend in northern Nigeria, so we work in Alaska that summer, make money, and fly to New York early September, get our visas, go to Kennedy Airport. Before we get on the plane, my friend buys a grocery bag full of novels. Well, I didn't read novels. And I'd never seen anybody buy so many books. I said, what are you going to do with all those books? He said, I'm going to read them, Dave. We fly over the desert, Sahara Desert, in the early morning. We land in Kano, northern Nigeria. Get out of the plane. It's already super hot. I've never been in a tropical place before, never been in a place where there wasn't winter, and walk across the tarmac between these two rows of guys with guns and walk into the airport terminal, which is the size of like a gymnasium. But it's crowded like an elevator. I mean, it's just packed. And the people who were supposed to pick us up weren't there. And the one phone at the airport didn't work. So plan B, we wait. And we waited and waited and waited all morning into the afternoon. We were just about to start working on plan C, but we were like slumped against the wall. It was hot. We were confused by all the people coming up to us, wanting to sell us stuff, talking to us in a language we didn't know. This guy walks up to us. He's wearing an Indiana University t-shirt. And he sees us down sitting on the floor against the wall, and he looks at us and he says, "You're lost, aren't you?" And we say, "Yeah, how could you tell?" He says, "Because I was you in your country." "Where are you going?" Turned out he was going the same place we were going, actually farther south. We were going 2 hours south from the airport. It wasn't a taxi ride. So we go with him, and we get out into the streets of Kano, which are really narrow and crowded with people, and the driver is, like one-story mud buildings and animals, and I'm hungry. He stops and buys a bunch of bananas, puts them on the seat next to me. I peel one, eat it, not sure what to do with the peel, put it on my lap, and peel another one and eat it, and not sure what to do with the peel, put it on my lap, and do that about 3, 4, 5 more times. The driver's trying to not hit something, but he's getting distracted by the growing pile of peels on my lap. After a while, he can't stand it anymore. He reaches over, grabs the peels off my lap, and throws them out the window. He says, "This is Africa. You can throw your banana peels out the window." I like Africa. I'm happy. We drive an hour south. We get to this big restaurant with a lot of tables outdoors. This isn't a place where people ignore you if you look different. Everybody's staring at us. We sit on the end of this lot of tables. After a while, people get used to us. They keep eating, except for one guy, a tall, skinny, drunk guy, who's all the way across the table of the restaurant, but he starts coming toward us, like this. It takes him a long time, wandering between the tables, but he's just got his eyes on us like a laser. Gets right up to our table and bends forward, looking at us. I'm just going, go away. He just stares and he says, "Your culture sucks." Now, not absolute truth. I'm going, "Oh, okay, just go away." He leans in closer. He says, "Africa will change you." Every story needs a prophet, right? We drive to where we're going, sleep in a nice house that night where I'm going to be the next number of months. It's where the university professors live, next to the Amadou Bello University campus. In the morning, I wake up. The sun's coming through the window. It's hot. I'm just super excited to be there. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to walk around. I'm going to get to know this place. I put on my sandals. I'd bought sandals for the trip. I'd never owned sandals in my life. Put on my shorts, walk outside. The guys out there were digging ditches. They didn't have shirts on. I thought, I don't need a shirt. Walk through the neighborhood, get to where the road ends, follow this trail, go past this kind of like these little mud houses with thatch roofs, kind of quaint, I thought, and waved and walked by, and down the trail I get to this road, take a left, walk about a mile in the hot sun thinking, I'm going to get a tropical suntan. I'd seen guys come from Hawaii and they had suntans. That's going to be me too. And anyway, I get to this market. I get to like this stick and tin market with all this stuff going on. These kids come out and they were super excited to see me. They took my hands and said, "Here, sit down here in the shade." And I'm just happy. I don't want to sit in the shade though because I want to get the tropical suntan. And I'm sitting there, I'm going, they're teaching me words like rock and stick and truck, and I'm thinking, I'm going to come here every day. It's going to be like one with learn the Hausa. You learn Hausa. It's going to be so cool. I was really happy. I was sitting there, and right when I'm just the happy as can be, this guy comes bursting out of that little cluster, cluster of market stalls, and he's screaming. I don't even know what he's screaming, who he's screaming at or anything, but he's screaming, and I realize he's screaming at me, and he's screaming in English. And he's saying, "Go away. You are a very stupid boy. You are a naked, stupid boy." And I'm backing up. I'm scared and shocked. And I turn my back. I start walking down that long road, and he's following after me. "You are a naked, stupid boy. If you come back here, I will beat you." I'm just walking. I'm just totally sad, confused, feeling stupid and naked. These trucks are going by, and they got all these people in them, and I'd been waving at the trucks on the way there, but I realized that those people were yelling, and they're probably yelling in Hausa, "Naked, stupid boy." And they turn onto the little trail and go past a little cluster of houses I thought was so cool, and I was just going, I felt humiliated. I felt ashamed. And I got back to the house, and I sat there in the shade, in the house, and there was this bag of books. And I started to read them. And over the course of like the next 4 or 5 months, I read them all. And in reading them, it was, my discovery of the novel was, it was like I discovered the most beautiful thing human beings had ever made. And not just the particular novel, but the form of the novel. It just blew my mind. Bong, like a dong went off. I was Saul on the way to Damascus. I knew I was going to write one. I knew it. So I came back to the University of Montana, and I took an introduction to grammar class.
Thanks, David. Thanks to all of our sponsors, too. Real quick. The Montana Book Festival. What a great week we have planned. Have you seen the program yet? There are some on the merch table if you need a program. Thanks to the Top Hat Lounge and the Wilma. Thanks to CabinetParts.com, Missoula Broadcasting Company, Gecko Design, Martin McCain Woodworks and Design, the bookstore at the University of Montana, Fact and Fiction, and Find. We're going to take a 10-minute intermission. So grab a drink, stretch your legs, visit the merch table, say hello to Joyce, and thank her for all of her support to help make Tell Us Something happen, because Joyce is a huge force in making this work. Shobha Rao is the author of the collection of short stories, An Unrestored Woman. She is the winner of the 2014 Catherine Ann Porter Prize in Fiction, awarded by Nimrod International Journal. She has been a resident at Hedgebrook and is the recipient of the Elizabeth George Foundation Fellowship. Her story, Kavita and Mustafa, was chosen by T.C. Boyle for inclusion in the Best American Short Stories 2015. She lives in San Francisco. Please welcome Shobha Rao.
We moved to the United States when I was about 7.5 years old. We moved to Virginia. And my dad was there for a 1-year fellowship. And at the end of that year, it was time to make a decision, and the decision was this: do we stay in the United States, or do we go back to India? And I'm sure my parents had some late night discussions and talked about the pros and cons. I'm sure they did. They didn't really consult my sister and I. We were both young, except for one day, one afternoon, I'm watching television, and my mom's cooking dinner, and she looks up at me, and she says, "So what do you think? Do you want to stay, or do you want to go?" And by this time, I'm 8, but I gave it some real thought. I thought, well, I've forgotten all my Hindi, which is India's national language, and which would be the language that most of my classes in India would be taught in. I'd forgotten it. And I had assimilated. I'd assimilated in only the way a child can assimilate. And so after giving it some thought, I said to her, "I want to stay." And we stayed. Probably not for that reason, but we stayed. And we moved around quite a bit in the coming years, and we finally ended up moving to Indiana, central, semi-rural Indiana. The cornfields were right there outside of town. And that is where I started high school. And now this high school had a policy where you could eat lunch on campus or you could leave. We just came back by the time lunch hour ended. And on cold days, in the wintertime, since I didn't have any friends, I would eat my lunch in one of the empty classrooms. But on warm days, sometimes I would go out, I'd wander around, and sometimes I would go to the Burger King, the nearby Burger King, and I would sit there by myself and I would eat my lunch. One day during my junior year, I'm sitting there, I'm eating my lunch at the Burger King, and these two girls walk in. They're my classmates. And these two girls, they're the most popular girls in my school. They are absolutely beautiful, especially Jen. Now, Jen is the classic American beauty. She has long blonde hair, she has these gray-green eyes, and she is fully developed. Fully developed. So she was, as you can imagine, really popular with the boys. So Jen and her friend, they look over and they see me sitting alone, and they come over, and Jen says, "Can we sit with you?" And I was so perplexed. No one had asked to sit with me at lunch, and I said, "Sure, go ahead." And so they joined me, and they talk mainly between themselves, but every now and then they would look over at me and they say, "So, what do you think of this teacher?" or "How did you do on this test?" And while they're talking, in the course of this lunch, it dawns on me why they'd asked to sit with me. No, it doesn't actually dawn on me. It hits me like a ton of bricks. The reason they'd asked to join me is because they pitied me. And, well, they felt sorry for me. And there I was, an object of their pity. And I wanted to say to them, please don't. You can feel anything else for me, but please don't feel pity. But I didn't say that, and we ended up, finished the lunch, and we went back. And as we're walking back, I said to myself, Amma, and Amma is the Telugu word for mom. I said, Amma, ask me again. Ask me again if I want to stay or if I want to go. So the years go on, I become an adult, and I move to San Francisco. And a couple of years ago, a friend of mine says, "Hey, let's go to a baseball game." And I had never been to a baseball game. And she says, "You got to come. It's the San Francisco Giants, and they're playing the Pittsburgh Pirates." And she knew I'd gone to school in Pittsburgh. So she said, "Oh, it's going to be great. You got to wear the gold and the black, which is the Pittsburgh Pirates colors, and we're going to go to AT&T Park, this huge ballpark. We're going to go to this game." I said, "Fine." And then she said to me, "And by the time you are done watching this baseball game, you will be an American." I was like, okay. I said, "Okay, all right." So I wore gold and black, and I show up, and we go into the ballpark. We watch the game, and it was pretty boring. But the garlic fries were really good. And so we watch the game. We walk out of the ballpark. We're walking to the metro stop, and there's a group of young men, and they're drinking, drunk, maybe, and they look over at us, they look over at me. One of the guys looks directly at me, and he says, "Why don't you just go home?" And I looked at him, and then I looked down, and I thought, "Amma, ask me again. Ask me again if I want to stay or if I want to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Shobha. Michael Marsolek is a musician and radio personality from Missoula. He is a singer, percussionist, and professional didgeridoo player. He sings with the 24-voice a cappella choir Dolce Canto. Michael is a founding member of Drum Brothers World Percussion Ensemble and has played professionally in a number of groups for more than 25 years. Every winter you will find him and his musical partner, Lawrence Duncan, on the road with a musical Dreamtime journey, celebrating the winter solstice season with candlelight concerts. His voice is familiar to radio listeners across Montana, as by day he is the program director for the Montana Public Radio Network. He has been at his current position since the day after September 11th. He lives with his 2 younger children in the Rattlesnake. Michael told a story at Tell Us Something a few years ago about his eldest daughter, titled The Parenting for Life Plan. The update is that now he's a grandfather. His story tonight is called Going for the One in a Roundabout Kind of Way. Please welcome Michael Marsolek.
That's good. So, I changed my life. I quit my job. I moved 750 miles back to Montana because of a song. What you may not know about me is before I had my career doing music and radio, I worked in the food business. I worked in the food business for 14 years, most of it managing restaurants in 4 states. The last stint was for TGI Fridays. I worked for 2 stores in the desert in Phoenix, I worked in Seattle, and I worked in Portland. The Portland store was the second busiest Fridays on the West Coast. It was incredibly busy and incredibly fun. I was being groomed to get my own store. I was the number 2 guy at the number of these restaurants. And the regional manager had come in and said, do you want to transfer to San Jose? I said, not really, no. And I'm glad I didn't, because the fall of that year, 1989, I would have been in the Bay Area during the earthquake. Well, he said to me, the regional manager said, you know, you're 4 to 6 months away from getting your own restaurant, and you can run one of these things. And that was really exciting. And this place was fun. It was so busy, we'd go on a waiting list at 5 o'clock every night. Almost every night, sometimes not on Mondays. We'd go off the waiting list at midnight. The bar would be 3 or 4 people deep all night on all 4 sides. There was a crew of 75 people that I worked with. The waiters and the bartenders were making money hand over fist. This place was doing $90,000 a week. It was busy and fun. Well, I've been a musician my whole life. My brother Matthew and I had our first official band together when I was in 6th grade, and he was in 4th. We've been making music off and on for most of our lives. And for most of my early life, and even now to a certain extent, I was that guy. You know the guy. The great record collection, the kick-ass stereo at home, buys all the albums on the day they come out, goes to lots of really great concerts, and makes mixed tunes tapes for all their family and friends. Right? I was that guy. I went to a lot of different concerts and I worked in a lot of different restaurants. When I was in the food business, a couple stories I don't have time to go into detail on. Like the story when I was chasing the dine and ditch dudes down Montana Avenue with a chili paddle.
Or the time when I was helping cook bar rush because the kitchen got completely snowed at this place I was working at, and I went back, I tucked my tie into my shirt, and I'm back there flipping eggs, and the waitress comes up to the window and she says to me, Michael, we need you. The guy on table 45 is asleep in his omelet. And when I went out there and woke him up, he jumped up swinging, just swinging. Or the time when I was down in the Phoenix area and working for this restaurant that had lots of celebrities coming in. The owner was friends with Waylon Jennings. There were lots of musicians that came in a lot. Alice Cooper came in one night with his family. He came up to me and he said, "Are you the manager?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I just want to have a nice night alone with my family tonight. I don't want to sign autographs. I don't want to be bothered. Can you help with that?" I said, "Well, I can't really keep people from approaching you, but, I'll kind of keep an eye on things." Turns out, people didn't really recognize him without the makeup. It wasn't really an issue that night. Walter Davis, the incredible shooting guard for the Phoenix Suns, came in one night to the restaurant I worked at in Phoenix and ran this huge tab up for his entire entourage and paid multiple thousands of dollars on an American Express card. Huge tip for the waitress, and then left the credit card at the restaurant. Waitress came up to me and said, "Mr. Marsolek, the Walter Davis left his credit card." I said, "Okay," stuck it in my shirt pocket. About a half an hour later, the phone rings. "It's Walter Davis from the Suns. I think I might have left my credit card there." I said, "Yeah, don't worry, I've got it. It's here in my pocket. If you want to send somebody down, pick it up, or if you want to come back or whatever you want to do." He said, "You got that in your pocket? You can't have that card in your pocket. You need to put that in a safe. That is a platinum American Express card with no limit. You could buy a Mercedes with that card." I really wanted to buy a Mercedes with that card. There was also the time when I was closing the restaurant. I was the last guy. I swear it was one of the busiest days of the entire year. Last one out, locked the doors. I get in my car outside the restaurant. I sit down, and that moment, the guy who's in the back seat of my car jumps up with a knife, holds it to my neck, and says, "Give me the money bag." I said, "I don't have the money bag." He said, "Go get it." I said, "Okay." I got out of the car, and then I'm walking towards the back of the restaurant, and the other guy came out, the one with the gun, and I was robbed at knife and gunpoint. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, what is the combination? I got to give these guys some money. We'll be fine. It's going to be fine. What did they teach me in management training when I did my management training for this? Give them anything they want and a burger and fries to go. Anyway, back to the music part. I got to go to a lot of concerts, right? I don't have time to tell those stories either. I was at the last Grateful Dead show, July 1995, Soldier Field. I got to see Momentary Lapse of Reason tour, Pink Floyd in the desert in Phoenix, Peter Gabriel at Red Rocks. But I've seen Yes 8 times. I've been a big fan of the band Yes. I think this was at the 2002 tour, actually. It says on the back. I've been a big fan since I was in junior high and discovered the Yes Songs album with my friends. As soon as I realized that here's a band that all 5 musicians are incredibly best of their craft, and they're doing this incredibly complex music, this progressive rock and roll, and the message is so positive and awesome for our world. It just completely worked for me. So needless to say, on June 20th, 1989, when the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe album came out, it's a Yes album, it's complicated, trust me. When that album came out, I did what we do in those days. I got off work at Fridays, I went and I bought the album at a record store, right? I went home and I was going to listen to the record. For those of you young people in the audience, we actually used to listen to the music top to bottom, front to back, the entire work of art, while holding the liner notes, while looking at the album artwork, while experiencing it with headphones. Things are a bit different now. I did that. I went home to my apartment in Portland, and I bought the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe album, and I listened to it. And here is the actual lyrics, word for word, what I heard that day, and what was into my brain, word for word. Not all of it, but quite a bit of it. So, giving all the love you have, never be afraid to show your heart. Someone told me, there are brothers, live forever in the big sky. Just hear your voice, sing all the songs of the world. Nothing can come between us, you're a brother of mine. Long lost brother of mine, seeing my life for the first time. Long lost brother of mine, living my life in the big dream. Long lost brother of mine, watching me walk in the full moon. And long lost brother of mine, redefining this long lost passion for the living we're in. This will be the first of many. I could not believe it. John Anderson had written a song for me. The next day, not 2 days, the next day, I walked in and I gave notice at TGI Fridays in Portland. A couple weeks later, I worked my last shift in a restaurant, and I'm happy to say that in the last 4 or 5 years, I finally have gotten far enough from working all those years in the food business that I'm experiencing going out to eat in a different way. I'm not like the food critic analyzing the waiter, watching how they plate the food and the garnishing and all that, right? It's very different for me now. Here's what happened in the next 2 months. I moved back to Montana. My brother Matthew and Patrick and I formed a trio and began to perform professionally as the Marsolek Brothers Trio. A little while later, we were sitting around a table in Clinton, Montana, trying to figure out what to call ourselves and the instruments that we had handcrafted as we were on our way to the UC Art Fair at the University of Montana. 3 brothers making drums. 3 brothers making drums. Drum Brothers has been making drums now for 25 years or more, and 7,500 drums later, my dad and sister-in-law still are building instruments. The Drum Brothers band was formed a few years later, and my brother Matthew and my musical brothers are playing music to this day. We started the Full Moon Drummings, which went on in Missoula for a quarter of a century here in town. Yeah. And finally, 27 years ago, this week, I went down to KUFM and I had my first training shift with the late John Myers. And I learned how to use my voice to do radio too. And for the first shows that I did solo, and for actually a number of years after that on those late night shifts, I played a lot of my favorite rock and roll. Yes, and Kansas, and Styx, and Supertramp, and Rush, and Van Halen, and Iron Butterfly. Yes, I was the guy that was playing Inagata Davida in the middle of the night, 89, 90, 91. I still get to make mixed tunes tapes every Tuesday at 11 o'clock for Montana on the radio, on Montana Public Radio. I've been doing it ever since. Our pledge drive's coming up in 3 weeks. Call 800-325-1565 or 243-6400 to pledge your support. There are brothers. Live forever in the big sky, he said. And I will. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Becca Kelly grew up in the countryside of eastern Pennsylvania. She ended up unexpectedly settling down in Missoula a few years back. In her late teens and 20s, she traveled a fair amount and discovered a love for foreign language. She is still figuring out what to do with that in Missoula. Meanwhile, she spends her time either with her 3-year-old son or focusing on the things she loves to do, practicing yoga, making jewelry, singing and playing guitar, and getting outside in this beautiful place where we live. Please welcome Becca Kelly.
Can y'all hear me out there? Oh, this is great. I can't see anything. Except for Frankie. So my story takes place here in Missoula. It happened in 2002, not so long ago. I was at the time a student at the University of Montana. I had a double major, German and Russian, and on this particular day that I'm going to tell you about was the last day of my second to last semester at the University of Montana. And it was the evening, it was around 7:30, and I was sitting in my little kitchen, which was on Front Street, across the street from the Rhino, right above the Angler store. You hear the Rhino like every night. I like to think just Saturdays and Sundays, but it was really every night. Fridays and Saturdays. Anyway, so it's been a crazy semester, and I'm having dinner with my friend Jen. She was also studying German and Russian, so she was my only friend of this kind at the university. And we were celebrating because it had been a crazy semester, and you know, it's 7:30, it's the last week of classes, the last day. And we're just sitting down to eat. So I'm gonna backtrack just a little bit and give you a little more background. So I, at the time, had one more semester before I finished my double German and Russian degree. And I had done all my German credits, and I only had to finish my Russian credits, and I had 4 classes of upper division Russian that I needed to take, which seemed like a breeze compared to, you know, how hard I had been working before that. And I knew that I would go to Russia and study Russian because that's what I did with German. I studied a lot of German, and then I spent 1.5 years of my first 3 years in college in where they speak German, because that's what you should do when you're studying German. And then the other 2 people I would like to tell you about was the Russian faculty at this time at the University of Montana. And I say 2 people because there were only 2 professors. And I'm going to describe each of them in detail. So first, there was Marina Kanievskaya, and she was this petite little woman who was the Russian faculty for me at the time. People would gather in her office after class and talk about Russian things, and you know, it's really fun, you know. It's exciting. Well, she made it, you know, she made it exciting because she was so cool, and she was such a little bird, you know. She would see you and say, Becca, как дела? Здравствуй, ну, как дела? And, you know, just like this, you know, and you'd be like, oh, hi, Marina, how are you? And one time I walked by her office, and I heard her telling another student, Rebecca, you know, she's like a sponge. Stuff like that, little things. And then the other professor, to juxtapose the 2 professors, her name was Ludmilla, and I say it like that because can you imagine a better name for like the evil character in the story? It's like Ludmilla. And Ludmilla looked like, you know, she slept in a case that covered her hair because it never changed the style ever. And she always wore the same shirt that buttoned up to her neck and a skirt that came to here or here. And when she walked, you know, oh, there's the Russian professor coming to class. Oh boy, you know. And she was a terrible professor, if you can imagine from that description. So I specifically went to her office one time because, you guys aren't going to believe this, because I wanted her to please speak a little more Russian to her students so that we could learn the Russian language through hearing it, you know, because we were studying it. She had her own class materials that she thought was really great, and she would read sentence by sentence her class materials at the front of class, like, you know, she was reading the military roll call, and otherwise not speak any Russian. So I went to her office and said, please speak more Russian, and she said, Becca, American students can't learn Russian. It's too difficult for them. I'm not kidding. needless to say, this angered me, and I kind of hated her guts. So anyway, we're going to come back to having dinner with my friend. We're celebrating. This is a great night, you know, hooray. And the phone rang, thinking, okay, it's 7:30 or so. Before I tell you what the phone call was, I'm going to give you a little more background. So you all know this intersection in town. When you go down 6th Street and you're going one way toward Mount Sentinel, and the road comes to Arthur, there's an intersection there, and then you go another block, and you can either go to the Adams Center or you can turn left and go over the Van Buren Bridge. So maybe a lot of you know, maybe some of you know, but I know you've all driven along this bit of Missoula. The traffic patterns used to be different, like yesterday in 2002. And you couldn't make a left onto Arthur there from 6th. You had to go straight down and then curve around and go up over the Van Buren Bridge. So there was quite a lot more traffic going around that curve, right by the Adams Center. Y'all know where I'm talking about. I'm just going to assume that. So Friday night, just sitting down to eat with my friend, babbling about the semester and the party that we're going to go to. We had like a masquerade party to go to with our crazy Dutch friends. The phone rings. Jennifer answers her phone, so excited, and her face just, boom, just dropped. And I thought, oh, what's going on? So, and maybe some of you remember this happening, I don't know. At about 7 p.m. that night, little Marina Kanievskaya was finishing her day of work at the end of a long semester. She crossed 6th right at the curve there where it goes around to go up and over the bridge, and a truck came around the curve and hit her. And she was lying in the road, and she was actually still alive from the story that I was told. And the man who was driving the truck apparently got out and inspected his truck and decided it wasn't damaged too badly and got back in it and drove away and left her there. And another car couldn't see her because it was dark out and came around the curve and ran her over. So that was the call that we got that night at 7:30 p.m. And you know, what do you do when you get a phone call like that? It was just so absurd. We couldn't really process it all, so I was just talking to Jen recently about this, and she was like, yeah, Becca, don't you remember? We went to the masquerade party, and we drank tons of vodka. I was like, no, that's probably why I don't remember. And then you could walk across the train tracks at that time, and then she ran outside and ran across the railroad tracks at the end of the night and like slept and tried to go stay on the railroad tracks and wouldn't leave. It was so dramatic. It's like, that's why they put the pedestrian bridge up, you know, all kinds of forks in the road for people. Anyway, that was a huge fork in the road for me, because I'll tell you that the short version of the story is that after we had kind of digested what happened, I said to myself, my God, couldn't they have gotten the other professor? You know, like, sounds terrible, but really the Russian fact department just disappeared. And for me, at least, I went to the first day of class. The next semester, being very brave, I went to Ludmila's class, and I had drafted a letter to her to say, please, you know, if you want to teach your students Russian, please speak Russian to them and use maybe some Russian language materials in your class. And all the Russian students signed it, or at least most of them did. And she walked in on the first day of class with big stacks of, like a big stack of paper like that big, and just threw it on everybody's desk like boom, boom. Here's your desire for an education, you sleazy little students, you know. At least that's the way I felt. And then she said, from here on, since everyone here wants to speak Russian in class and read Russian, we're only going to do that. And everybody looked like, oh my God, these are like 18th century texts. How are we supposed to do this? So needless to say, I walked out and never went back. And then I ended up getting a Russian studies minor and a Russian minor. And it changed the course of my life, really, because if I had studied Russian, I would have gone to Russia. I know I would have. And instead, I finished school. And what do you do with a major in German and minors in Russian and Russian studies? I went to South Korea. Thought I would teach English. That didn't work out either. I ended up getting into some interesting work in South Korea because I needed income. I did voiceover and worked for film, and towards the end of my stay started playing guitar, and never know where life leads you. I think every moment is a fork in the road, really. But now I'm in Missoula again. I never expected it, and every time I go around that intersection, I think of her. And recently I had the most this kind of odd experience going around that intersection and realizing not only that I'm back in Missoula, but that I wouldn't have been here. I don't think I ever would have been here if it hadn't been for Marina. I don't think I ever would have come back. So that's the kind of fork in the road that you don't know is a fork in the road until much, much later in time. And now it's a fork in the road for everybody because nobody can go down 6. And now you have to turn there, right? All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Becca. Having lived in a teepee at the base of the 14,000-foot Southern Rockies, Tommy Peterson moved to Missoula and the Northern Rockies 25 years ago to continue mountain life, getting his graduate degree in environmental studies at the University of Montana. He is the editor of the Conservation anthology, A Road Runs Through It, with a foreword by Annie Pralks, and on writing breaks, plays soccer with the old boys at the Peace Farm soccer field. Please welcome Tommy Peterson.
This is called Going Postal and is for Brian. At age 60, I lost my job of 17 years as development director of a small nonprofit here in Missoula. I knew it was coming. Our organization was a time when the recession was happening. Our organization was struggling a little bit, even though it was a great organization. We had to merge with a larger one in order to survive. And my executive director told me about it some months ahead of time, so I was kind of prepared. But they had a larger development department, fundraising department, and I wasn't a part of that merger. So after 17 years, I was without a job here in Missoula, which is a tough kind of thing. But after 17 years, it was kind of nice to take a break and just enjoy this beautiful town that we're in, at least for a few weeks, because you can't be here very long without work. So I figured, who likes to raise money? Nobody. So there's a lot of development director positions out there, and I'd been doing it a long time. And sure enough, there was one that I saw kind of right away there a couple weeks later. Put in my resume and cover letter, and got the first interview. That went great. Got the second interview. Oh, this is good. This is good. Got a phone call. Then now it's a few weeks later because this takes a little while to happen. And it was, you came in second. Okay, all right. No worries. Again, a lot of nonprofits here in Missoula, a lot of development directors, so a lot of positions. And sure enough, I saw a second position sort of crop up, applied for that one. Put in my resume, cover letter, got the first interview, went great. Got the second interview with the executive director and a couple of staff people, and we got along famously. And in fact, that one, there was sort of a scheduling snafu, and the other person, because I said that I knew at the time there was just two of us at that time that were for the position. The other person was a younger woman, about 35, well-dressed woman. So that was interesting to kind of see that was my competitor. But I thought the second interview went really well, and got the phone call, you were runner-up. Okay, took a deep breath, and I'm kind of a sports guy. As Mark said, I played a little soccer and played baseball and blah, blah, and I figure, okay, I'm 0 for 2. And, in baseball, that's not too bad. And these weren't strikeouts. These were like fly balls, maybe at the warning track even. So I was hanging in there. And so I kind of figure I can do this again. And I do. And I see a third position. And third time's a charm, right? So I apply and put in my resume and my cover letter. In case you haven't applied for a job in a while, this takes a while for these things to happen. It's not like a quick phone call. After you turn in things, and it takes a couple of weeks, and then you get the first interview. And then if you're lucky enough to get the second interview, that's a few more weeks. And then there's the phone call. So by this time, it had been 4 or 5 months I'd been without work. So I was really kind of counting on this one. And with that second interview with this position, I was in front of the whole board of directors. And I was feeling pretty good. And they were asking me good questions. I felt like I was giving good answers, and so left feeling pretty confident. So a couple weeks later, I get a message to give that organization a call. And I remember I was sitting in my car in a parking lot at Rose Hours, of all places, and I was parked, and I take a deep breath and I call them back. And they say, Tommy, we really loved your energy. We really, really loved it. And we had a vote with our board, and it was 4-3, and you didn't get the position. I wasn't smiling then. I remember I took the keys and threw them against the dash of the car. I was just enraged. And I was like calling that organization every name in the book. I had hung up the phone at this point. You can imagine, right? This is third time and out, and second place, 4-3, shit. So I'm driving home, and I'm just pissed. And I get home, and my anger, I meet my wife at the door, and my anger turns into just tears, It's just like, oh, baby, yeah, So, but I have a plan B. All along, I kind of had a plan B. And that was the post office. I had seen in the paper somewhere, Craigslist, I think, actually, an ad for a rural postal carrier. And I figured, what the hell, It's not my, area of experience, but I need work, I live in Missoula, Montana. So I applied. And so during all that time when I was applying for all those jobs, I was also applying for the post office. And that means the post office, being a government position, you take a lot of tests. You take a test, for instance, to see basically if you're dyslexic or not. Because a mailbox with a number 7233 is very different than 2733. And you better know the difference between that. So it turns out I'm not dyslexic, so that's good. You take drug tests. You take customer service tests, right? What do you do if a customer says, fuck you? You say, have a nice day, So, So lo and behold, I get a call from the postmaster of Missoula Post Office, come into my office, I want to interview you. After all these tests, right? Okay. And I sit down in his office and he said, I want to offer you the job. It's like, seriously? You know, and there it is. There's the split for me. There's the fork for me. It's like, do I continue to literally beat my head up against the wall with this development work? You know, this is what I've done pretty much all my life. Or do I take a job that's offered to me? You know, here it is. So I went postal. So the post office it's a steep learning curve, and they hired me right at the holidays. Really, my first day on the job was the day after Thanksgiving. Busiest mail day of the year. I was out there late with a headlamp and stuff. I really was. But I mean, it's a steep learning curve. But once you get it, you know, you kind of got under your belt. So it's winter time, you know, right after the holidays, and I'm doing my route, and I'm driving one of those post office white boxy kind of vehicles, right-hand side, you know, driving. Windows always down because you're delivering mail out this way. And as I'm going up the street, I see someone standing at the mailbox, which isn't all that unusual. Some people meet you at the mailbox. But as I get closer, I realize, well, wait a minute, this guy looks familiar. And as I pull up, it's Brian. And I realize, Brian, oh yeah, Brian is a guy that's developmentally disabled and lived in a group home, and about 20 years ago or so, my family took them meals, and we would take all these guys a dinner meal, and we'd sit down and have dinner with these guys. It's like, this is Brian. And as I pull up, I stop and say, Brian, right? That's Brian. And he instantly recognizes me. Tommy, I know you. Tommy, how long have we known each other? Well, I don't know, 22 years, Brian. 22 years, that's a long time. It is a long time, Brian. That's fabulous. And Brian goes on to tell me about a little bit of his life. He was working at the Top Hat, actually, washing dishes. And he said, well, yeah, like Tommy, I cut my hand. And Brian's a big guy. I mean, he's like 200 pounds. He's broad-chested. So he's got these big hands, and he puts his big hand and his swollen finger that he cut in my smaller hand. So to show me. I said, oh, that's awful, Brian. Wow, but it looks like it's healing pretty good. Yeah, it's okay. It's all right. It's all right. So Tommy, how long have we known each other? Well, it's about 22 years, but that's a long time. It is, Brian, and we chat a few more minutes, and it's like, Brian, I gotta go. I gotta deliver mail, so we say goodbye. The next week, there's Brian at the mailbox. I stop. Tommy, it's so good to see you. Tommy, how long have we known each other? Well, about 22 years or so, Brian. That's a long time, 22 years. Yeah, it is, Brian. And he starts to polish my outside mirror because he sees something on there, and then he stops and looks, and he polishes it some more. And he says, well, hey, Tommy, can you get me one of those lanyards that you have on me? Because I have my ID tag in them on those little plastic sleeves. Can you get me one of those? I said, well, I can't get you the ID tag. He said, no, just the little plastic thing. I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that, sure, absolutely. So week after week, Brian would meet me at the mailbox, and we would chat, and we would change stories like that. So this went on for months, and so now it's summertime, and I pull up to the mailbox. Brian, Tommy, how are you? Tommy, how long have we known each other? I said, well, it's 22 years, but that's a long time, Tommy. Hey, Tommy, you know what? What, Brian? I'm going to Graceland. You mean like Elvis Presley Graceland? Yeah, I'm going to Graceland. I'm going with my wife. I didn't know Brian was married, you know. Yeah, we're going on the plane, and I get to hold her hand. I said, oh, that is fabulous, Brian. Yeah, we're going to be there for a while, and when we fly back, I get to hold her hand again. And at that point, the tears are welling up. And I was like, Brian, I gotta go. And I don't let him do the 22-year thing. I just pull away because I'm starting to cry. And I pull over to the side, and I realize I'm sort of now kind of one of those times where you're sort of laughing and crying at the same time, because I realized that this is part of what this fork has given me. That is that I am so fortunate that I get to witness that kind of sweetness, that I get to witness that kind of love of holding someone's hand. You know, that I've gotten to witness Brian. It's a lucky me. So fast forward about 6 months. And still doing my route, but they changed the day of my route from a Saturday to a Wednesday. And for the past few months, couple months, I hadn't seen Brian because I figured he had to work on that Wednesday. He maybe had Saturdays off. So when I pull up, though, I kind of slow down at his mailbox. I don't see him there, but I slow down. I kind of crane my neck and look over to see if he's maybe coming out, maybe he's a little late. But he hasn't come out. I haven't seen him for a while, and I miss him. Because, you know, it's been like 23 years now. And that's a long time. Thank you.
Thanks, Tommy. Here's to Brian. Big thanks to all of you all who come out to tell us something every time. Thanks to the newcomers. Thanks for coming out to celebrate each other's stories and give us your ears. Thanks to all of our sponsors, the Montana Book Festival. Top Hat Lounge, you know, they have the best Cuban sandwich in town. It's so good. I try to get something different every time, and I end up getting a Cuban. The Wilma. CabinetParts.com, and there are coupons on the merch table for cabinet parts if you wanted to grab one of those. Missoula Broadcasting Company, Gecko Design, Martin McCain Woodworks and Design, the bookstore, the bookstore at the University of Montana, Fact and Fiction and Find. After living in Polson for 7 years before moving on, Allison Cox still considers Montana a place she calls home. Allison has been telling stories to anyone who will listen since she could talk. She even started calling herself a storyteller back in 1982. She's been traveling and sharing her stories ever since. She combined her years in public health with her love of story to edit and contribute to 2 books, The Healing Heart for Families, Storytelling to Encourage Caring and Healthy Families, and The Healing Heart for Communities, Storytelling for Strong and Healthy Communities. I need to read that book. She was a founder of the Healing Story Alliance and edits their online journal. Allison lives with her 4-legged and 2-legged family on Vashon Island in Washington State, surrounded by gardens, woods, and water. Please welcome Allison Cox.
Yeah. Hello, Montana. It's good to be back. Well, it was 1970, and we were driving along the road from Mexico City out to the pyramids, when up ahead we saw a girl waving at us and holding up a clay statue. And so Adrian pulled his VW bug over to the side of the road and got out, and just moments later he got back in and handed the statue to me. Is it authentic? He just shrugged. Well, then why did you buy it? He just smiled at me and turned the key in the car, and as he started to pull away, Patty and I turned and looked, and we saw that child, still covered with dust from the road, couldn't have been more than 10 years old, running to a shack that was set way back off the road and waving the money in her hand. And Patty leaned forward from the back seat and patted Adriana on the shoulder, and she said, "You're our Mexican mensch." And he truly was. Patty and I had just finished our junior year in high school, where we had met Renee, an exchange student. And she had invited us to come to visit in Mexico, but when we got there, she was too busy to be our tour guide. And so Adrian had volunteered to take her place, her 20-year-old brother. But he said, "You're gonna have to do your homework," which meant that he would give us pamphlets the night before. He would take us the next day to the museum, the cathedral, the National Palace, the ballet. We loved it. Then he said, "We're going on a road trip. We're going to see 2,000-year-old pyramids, and then we're going to stay with a family that I know, family home, in Acapulco." The only word I heard in that whole sentence was Acapulco. That morning, July, in Mexico, out among the pyramids, it was already so hot, I was feeling woozy. So we walked around for a while till we decided, well, we'll climb the smallest of the big pyramids. It was the most decayed, but it was the shortest climb. But when I got up there, oh, there was this delicious breeze. And so I stood at the summit with my toes right at the edge, and there was a mountain in the distance that just seemed to call to me. So I put out my arms, like I used to do when I was a kid and I'd pretend to fly. And I imagined I was flying to that summit, to that mountain in the distance. And the ground was passing quickly beneath me as I was going faster and higher. And in my mind's eye, I turned and looked to the side, and there, where my arm should have been, was this massive wing, vast in length and completely covered with feathers. And then I heard someone shout my name, and I was pulled backwards by my shirt, and I stumbled into Adrian, and he said, "Whoa there. You were leaning out so far, you were about to become a squash tourist." And I must have looked disoriented because he and Patty walked me down to the bottom of the pyramid, and I said, "Well, what is this place?" And he said, "Well, this is the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Ah, he was the feathered serpent, the lord of death and rebirth." And immediately I flashed on that giant wing covered with feathers, and it totally freaked me out. So I just crawled into the back of the Volkswagen, and I kept my mouth shut and just held onto that loop, you know, that they had on the side, as he went from one hairpin turn to the next, all the way through the hill country down to the coast. When we got to Acapulco, it was sunset, and this family home was a villa. It was perched on top of a rock cliff, and there were stone steps that wound down to the sea. Inside the compound, there was an entire orchard of tropical fruit trees that we could pick our breakfast from. And our only chaperone was a sweet-faced woman named Maria, who was always barefoot. And her son, Jaime, was the groundskeeper, but he was the same age as Adrian. So the four of us played the entire time. We went to the highlight game, we saw the cliff divers, we ate shaved ice with mango syrup, and we went swimming every day. One day, a tour boat came drifting near our dock, and it sputtered something in staccato Spanish that cracked up all my friends sitting on the dock. "What?" I called from where I'm floating in the inner tube, and Jaime said, "They just said that this is the summer home of Jackie Onassis, and that all of us are visiting Olympic swimmers." I smiled and waved. Well, the next day, the guys took us windsurfing, and so I had on long sleeves and long pants, and I burned my feet. It looked like I was wearing red socks, and then they began to swell, and I started to cry because that was our only Saturday night to go dancing in the Acapulco discos like we planned. And Adrian said, "It's all right. The best show will be right here tonight, you'll see." So that night after dinner, he walked us out onto the open-air stone balcony, and he pointed out how there was a bioluminescence that edged each wave with a neon light as it lapped onto the shore. Off in the distance, there was a curtain of lightning that laced down to the sea. But above us, the sky was clear and there was a cacophony of stars. And then Adrian picked up one of the conch shells that was laying along the balcony wall, and he showed me how there was a hole drilled in the top, and then he blew what sounded like a foghorn, long and deep, and resonated across the bay. And then moments later, from all sides, conch shells trumpeted in response. It was magical. Well, I stayed up way late that night talking to Adrian, and I finally told him about my experience on top of the pyramid. I said, don't you think it's strange that I was standing up there imagining that I'm like some giant dragon-sized creature covered with feathers, and I'm standing on the feathered serpent's pyramid? Adrian said, well, maybe you read something in the booklet the night before and you forgot about it. I said, Adrian, I was so excited about going to Acapulco, I read nothing about the pyramids. He said, well, maybe it was heat stroke. I don't know. Allison, it just seems like a coincidence to me. You know, I'm a confirmed atheist. I said, atheist? Adrian, how can you not believe in God when you have all this? And I gestured to the sea and the sky and the luminous waves. He said, well, I love nature, but that doesn't convince me there's a deity behind it. And then 16-year-old me said, there is a God, and there is life after death, and on and on and on. Well, the nuns back at Catholic school would have been shocked because I usually argued with them in religion class. But Adrian didn't argue. He just listened, he stated what he believed, and we talked on late into the night. Well, not long after that, it was time to fly home. But I was changed. My world had expanded exponentially. And so Adrian, we stayed in touch through letters. Remember letters? Yeah. He'd write me multiple page letters, and he'd send me books like Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian. I didn't read it. And then I'd save art cards for him, and I'd send him with books like The Little Prince, and I'd underline, it is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. And then he went off to study submarine engineering in Norway. Whew. And I went off to college. And the letters became more scarce as our pathways diverged. I remember I stayed up really late the night before the call came. And so that morning I was dreaming that I was in bed, in my bedroom, except that everything was white. And I realized it was because the room was filled with light. And out of that light came floating Adrian. And he hovered in the air right next to my head where I was sitting up in my bed. And I said, Adrian, what are you doing here? And he said, I just came to tell you, you were right. And then he floated back into the light, and I was calling after him, but I started to hear this ringing, this incessant ringing. And then I realized I was asleep. And so I struggled to wake up and stumbled into the kitchen and answered the phone, and it was my mother. She said that Renee had just called from Mexico and that Adrian had died of a heart attack. He was only 24 years old and just about to get his engineering degree. But it turned out he had a weak heart that he never talked about. Well, I was stunned. So I hung up the phone after I thanked my mom. Now, looking back at all this now from the other side of the bell curve of life, I really am much less certain about what it is I believe in now, because I find that I can collect all kinds of proofs for pro and con, but it doesn't matter because they're all overrun by my overwhelming desire of what it is I want to believe. And so I can't tell you what any of this means about the nature of reality or immortality, but I can tell you this, that whenever I think about this story, my heart leads. And it leaps right over those big questions and goes first and foremost to this, that what I want to believe is that when I came this time to that great fork in the road that separates me from the people I love, that just this once, Adrian stopped by to say goodbye. That's my reality, and I'm sticking to it.
Thanks, Allison. And big thanks to all of you for coming out again. Thanks to John Engen, Jameson Gordon, Neil McMahon, Perry Nyes, Pat Williams, David Allen Cates, Shobha Rao, Michael Marsolek, Becca Kelly, Tommy Peterson, and Allison Cox. The next Tell Us Something event is here at the Wilma on December 13th. The theme is The Unlikeliest of Places. Ticket on sale date will be announced on the Facebook page and the website. So like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, check out the website, tellussomething.org. Thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the Book Fest.